Millionaire gets home early and sees wife kicking Black Maid's daughter. What he does shocks all. The sound of polished high heels echoed against the marble floor of the Rivers mansion, sharp and steady, like a warning before a storm. Jonathan Rivers, Millionaire CEO, pushed the front door closed behind him and slipped his keys into his pocket. His meeting had ended 2 hours earlier than planned. For once, he wanted to surprise his family with an early return home. What he didn't expect was to step straight into a nightmare. Before he even set down his briefcase, a dull crash rang out from the living room, followed by a frightened whimper. Jonathan froze in the doorway. His pulse quickened. That sound hadn't been furniture moving or something dropping by accident. It was the sharp, brittle crack of porcelain against stone. He turned the corner, and what he saw made his stomach clench. In the middle of the gleaming living room, an expensive vase lay shattered in pieces, sharp fragments scattered across the rug, and next to it, little Lana, only 8 years old, pressed herself into the corner of the wall, her small hands trembling as she shielded herself. A thin line of blood trickled down her knee where she had fallen, staining her socks. Her wide, dark eyes glistened with tears. Towering over her was Vivian, Jonathan's wife of 3 years. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect smile in public. But now her face was twisted with a rage Jonathan had never seen before. She pointed down at the girl like an executioner, her manicured finger shaking with fury. "You useless brat!" Vivian spat, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Do you know how much that vase cost? More than your mother earns in an entire year scrubbing this house." Jonathan froze at the threshold, still gripping the leather strap of his briefcase. His mind tried to process the image, but it clashed too violently with the Vivian he thought he knew. The elegant, polite woman who charmed their friends at dinners, now standing like a predator over an injured child. The girl sobbed, clutching the hem of her shirt. I was just trying to help clean, Mrs. Vivian." The vase slipped when the TV got loud. Her voice trembled so softly it was almost swallowed by the enormous room. Vivian raised her hand high, fingers curled, ready to strike. Jonathan's heart pounded. For a split second, time slowed, and every sound sharpened. The faint hum of the air conditioning, the drip of blood sliding down the child's shin, the harsh breathing of his wife, and then his voice, louder than he expected, cut across the room. "Vivian!" She jerked around, shock flashing across her face before she could hide it. In an instant, the cruel mask melted into one of feigned surprise, her eyes widening as though she'd been caught off guard by something as innocent as the weather. "Jonathan, darling," she said quickly, smoothing her hair, her tone sugar-sweet. "I didn't hear you come in." "Lana," Jonathan said firmly, his voice low but carrying across the room. He didn't look at Vivian. His eyes locked only on the trembling child pressed into the corner. "Are you hurt?" The girl blinked at him through tears, her chest rising and falling with shallow, panicked breaths. She glanced at Vivian as though seeking permission to answer. When no answer came, she whispered so faintly Jonathan had to lean forward to hear. "My knee, sir. It's just a scratch." He took a slow step closer, careful not to startle her. He crouched to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "Can you tell me what happened?" Lana hesitated, biting her lip. Her small fingers picked nervously at the hem of her shirt. I was cleaning the table like I always do. Then the TV got loud, someone yelling on the screen. I turned too fast and my elbow hit the vase." She stopped, her voice breaking. "It slipped. I didn't mean to." "She's lying," Vivian cut in sharply, her voice dripping with disdain. Jonathan finally turned his head toward her. His wife stood with arms crossed, posture stiff, eyes narrowed into slits. "I caught her playing with it, pretending it was a microphone. That child has no respect for valuable things, and instead of admitting it, she wastes more of our time with stories." Jonathan studied Lana again. The girl had shrunk even smaller at Vivian's accusation, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the floor. Not the posture of someone defiant or reckless. It was the posture of someone terrified of being disbelieved. "She doesn't look like she's lying," Jonathan said carefully. Vivian scoffed. "You've always been too soft, Jonathan. Children like her need discipline. Carmen never corrects her, so she does as she pleases. And now, look at the result." She gestured at the broken porcelain scattered across the rug, as though it were proof of everything she claimed. Jonathan ignored her again. He focused on Lana, who still hadn't lifted her eyes. "Sweetheart, look at me," he said gently. After a moment's hesitation, the child obeyed. What Jonathan saw in those wide, tear-filled eyes made his stomach knot. It wasn't the nervousness of a girl who had broken a vase once by accident. It was the haunted, cautious fear of someone who had been through this before, many times. Her tiny shoulders shook as she tried to hold back sobs. She pressed her lips together like she had trained herself not to cry too loudly. And beneath that, Jonathan recognized something else. Resignation. The kind of resignation that came from expecting punishment no matter what the truth was. Vivian's voice sliced the air again. "You see? She can't even look you in the eye, because she knows she's guilty." Jonathan kept his eyes on Lana. The silence stretched, heavy, speaking louder than any words. He had sat through hundreds of high-stakes negotiations, read board members' micro-expressions, uncovered hidden motives in corporate deals. The same instincts told him now, with chilling clarity, this wasn't an isolated accident. This was a pattern, and for the first time he realized he might have been blind to it all along. Vivian's face transformed so quickly it was unsettling. 1 second, she was a storm, eyes narrowed, hand raised, venom dripping from her voice. The next, her expression melted into something softer, polished, almost angelic. She let her lips curve into a smile that had won over countless strangers, her posture relaxing as if she had never stood poised to strike. "Oh, Jonathan," she said sweetly. The edge in her tone vanished as if it had never existed. "You startled me, coming home so early." She smoothed down her dress with slow, graceful movements. Her voice was syrupy, every syllable dripping with practiced calm. "I was only trying to teach her to be careful. Children drop things, you know." "It's natural." Jonathan didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the small figure in the corner, the way Lana pressed herself against the wall, as if hoping she might vanish into it. The trembling of her little shoulders hadn't stopped. Her eyes glistened, darting nervously between him and Vivian. She wasn't reassured by the sudden sweetness in Vivian's voice. If anything, the shift made her shrink further. Jonathan turned back to his wife, and something twisted inside him. He had seen this charm before, hundreds of times, but never like this. At business dinners, she was flawless, quick with compliments, laughing at the right moments, turning even the most skeptical guests into admirers. At charity events, she had been the perfect benefactor, warm and approachable, slipping her hand through his arm with elegance. But what he had just witnessed wasn't the slip of a temper, wasn't stress bubbling over. No, this was different. It was deliberate, calculated, controlled. As Vivian bent down, lifting one sharp piece of porcelain from the rug with delicate fingers, Jonathan's mind churned. Memories lined up like ghosts in the shadows, demanding to be acknowledged. He remembered Carmen's polite but tight smile whenever Vivian entered the room. A smile that never quite touched her eyes. A smile stretched like a mask to cover unease. He remembered Lana, who had always been curious and talkative with him, suddenly going silent whenever Vivian walked in. The way her cheerful voice would drop into whispers, her body shrinking smaller, her laughter dying instantly as though someone had flipped a switch. And there were the comments. Subtle, almost invisible at the time. "Some people don't know how to behave in a house like this," Vivian had once said at a dinner party, sipping her wine while the guests chuckled politely. Jonathan had smiled then, brushing it off as a harmless observation. Now the words came back like poison in his ears. Who exactly had she meant? He thought of the staff turnover. Vivian often said housekeepers or gardeners weren't a good fit, and Jonathan had accepted it. He trusted her judgment in running the home, too busy with board meetings and shareholders to ask questions. But how many of those dismissals had been about competence, and how many about something darker? Vivian rose gracefully and set the porcelain shard on the coffee table with a sigh so heavy it was almost theatrical. "That vase," she said, pressing a hand against her chest as though her heart ached, "was a wedding gift from my aunt. Do you know how humiliating it will be to explain this?" Her voice trembled just enough to sound believable. Her eyes flicked toward Jonathan, measuring his reaction with the precision of a performer checking if the audience was still under her spell. But for the first time in 3 years, Jonathan wasn't clapping. He was watching carefully, too carefully, and the seams of the performance were glaring. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way her shoulders stiffened when she thought he wasn't looking. The way her words seemed rehearsed, every rise and fall of her voice engineered to manipulate. Jonathan's mind flashed back to the beginning, to when they first met. She had seemed perfect, too perfect. Her laugh, her kindness, her sympathy during his long hours of work. He had thought she understood him in a way no one else did. But even then, hadn't there been moments when her charm felt a fraction too polished, her responses too rehearsed? At the time, he had dismissed the doubts. He told himself it was paranoia, that she was simply refined, experienced in social circles he had only recently entered. Now, standing here, he saw the truth. Those weren't coincidences or quirks. They were rehearsed performances. The woman, smoothing her hair in front of him, was not losing her temper with a child. She was revealing herself, and then, just as quickly, burying that self beneath a mask. Jonathan's chest tightened as the realization sank deeper. For 3 years, he hadn't been married to a person. He had been married to a character. A role, carefully constructed, played to perfection. And he, sharp, calculating Jonathan Rivers, the man who had outmaneuvered competitors and built a $500 million company, had fallen for it completely. His gaze shifted to Lana again, to the way her tiny hands twisted together, her knuckles white, her breath trembling. Children didn't know how to fake fear like that. Fear that deep only came from experience. And then another memory clawed its way to the surface. A moment at a summer party when Vivian had leaned close to him and whispered about keeping the staff in line. He had laughed then, thinking she was joking, brushing it off with a kiss on her cheek. Now the memory burned. Jonathan felt his pulse in his ears. His instincts, honed from years of negotiations, boardroom betrayals, and corporate survival, screamed at him. He knew when someone was bluffing. He knew when someone was playing a part. And Vivian, his wife, was bluffing her way through their entire life. She looked at him now with those perfect, practiced eyes waiting for him to nod, to smile, to reassure her that her mask was still intact. But Jonathan didn't smile. Inside, something cold and certain clicked into place. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Vivian as his wife. He was looking at her as an opponent. And he realized he had never truly known the woman who had been sharing his home, his table, his life, and once you recognize a mask, you can never unsee it. The front door opened with a soft creak, and the faint rustle of paper bags followed. Jonathan heard footsteps in the hall, measured and careful, as if whoever carried them had learned to tread lightly in this house. Carmen's voice called out, warm but weary. "Lana, Mr. Jonathan, I'm back from the market." The little girl flinched at the sound. Her head jerked toward the doorway, and her small body stiffened. Jonathan didn't miss it, the way her shoulders pulled tight, the way she seemed to brace herself. This wasn't the reaction of a child relieved to hear her mother. This was the reaction of someone who knew her mother's return could trigger another confrontation. Carmen stepped into the living room, brown paper bags cradled in her arms. Her eyes landed first on the shattered vase, then on her daughter's scraped knee, and finally on Vivian's icy expression. The air between the four of them thickened instantly. "What happened here?" Carmen asked, setting the bags gently on the floor. Her voice tried for calm, but Jonathan caught the tremor beneath it. Vivian was the first to speak, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Your daughter had a little accident," she said, gesturing elegantly toward the broken porcelain. She broke the Ming vase. "Luckily, she wasn't hurt badly, but we really must talk about proper supervision when she's here." Carmen's lips pressed into a thin line. She lowered her gaze quickly, almost submissively, before turning to her daughter. "Lana, are you all right, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Mama," Lana answered automatically, the words rushed, rehearsed. Her eyes didn't meet her mother's. Jonathan noticed the avoidance immediately. It was the same silence, the same forced calm he had seen in boardrooms when junior employees feared speaking out in front of domineering bosses. Jonathan stepped closer, kneeling again near Lana. "She's scraped her knee. It needs cleaning," he said softly. Then he looked at Carmen. "Could you take her to the kitchen? I'll join you in a moment." Carmen nodded quickly, too quickly, and reached for her daughter's hand. But before they left the room, Jonathan caught something he wasn't meant to see. A flicker of communication passed between mother and daughter, a look, brief and heavy, layered with unspoken meaning. Lana's eyes widened, pleading silently. Carmen's jaw tightened, her face carefully neutral, but her fingers squeezed her daughter's hand in a silent reassurance. It wasn't the glance of two people reacting to a one-time accident. It was the exchange of survivors who had endured this routine before. Jonathan's chest tightened. He shifted his gaze to Carmen. Her posture seemed deliberately small, shoulders angled downward, her tone deferential when she spoke to Vivian. Yet, in her eyes, Jonathan saw the same restrained fear he had just read in Lana's. It was a controlled fear, carefully hidden beneath politeness, the kind that grows only after years of being taught the consequences of speaking too boldly. How had he missed this for so long? The nervous smiles, the way Carmen never lingered in the same room with his wife, the way Lana always clung to her mother's side when Vivian was near. It was all there, plain as day, if only he had chosen to look. As Carmen guided Lana toward the hallway, Jonathan's gut twisted. The truth was written in their eyes, in their silence, in the way they both carried themselves. Cautious, guarded, waiting for the next outburst. This wasn't an isolated accident. It was a pattern woven deep into the walls of his home, and in that moment, Jonathan realized Vivian's cruelty wasn't directed only at a child. It was systemic. It lived in every look, every word, every subtle power play she imposed on the vulnerable. He watched them disappear into the kitchen, and he knew he could no longer pretend not to see. Vivian waited until Carmen and Lana had vanished into the kitchen before letting her mask slip again. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and fixed Jonathan with a look that carried both irritation and superiority. "You're overreacting," she said calmly, though her eyes flashed cold. "Someone has to teach that girl discipline. If Carmen won't do it, then it falls to me. A house without rules descends into chaos." Jonathan folded his arms, studying her carefully. "You think screaming at an 8-year-old is discipline?" Vivian tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You don't understand. Children like her, children of the staff, must learn respect early. Otherwise, they grow up believing they can act like equals. That's dangerous, Jonathan. It creates confusion." He felt a chill crawl up his spine at the ease with which she said it, as if she were explaining simple arithmetic. "I am the lady of this house," she continued, her tone sharpening. "That means I set the standards here. Not Carmen, not Lana, not anyone else. It's my duty to maintain order, to ensure people know their place." She gestured around the room, as though the polished floors and expensive furniture were proof of her authority. "This home is not a playground. It's a symbol of status. And that comes with rules." Jonathan's stomach twisted. He had expected excuses, maybe stress, maybe anger, but what she offered instead was a philosophy. A belief system rooted in control and hierarchy. "Her mother cleans our floors," Vivian went on, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you really think it's wise to let the child of a maid run around here unchecked? If she grows up thinking she belongs on our level, she'll only suffer later. I'm protecting her from disappointment. Better she learns humility now than heartbreak later." Jonathan stared at her, speechless for a moment. He thought of Lana's trembling body, the blood on her knee, the silence in her eyes. Protecting her? No, Vivian wasn't protecting anyone. She was breaking her. Vivian mistook his silence for hesitation. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if confiding a secret. "You're a businessman. You of all people should appreciate structure. There are leaders and there are followers. People like us create. People like them serve. It's the way the world works. I'm simply ensuring the next generation understands that truth." Her words landed heavy, poisonous, undeniable in their clarity. Jonathan realized with sick certainty that this wasn't a burst of temper or an emotional lapse. This was deliberate. She believed every word, and for the first time, he saw not just cruelty but ideology staring back at him. A worldview built on superiority, one she had likely nurtured long before she entered his life. Jonathan's hands curled into fists at his sides. He had faced ruthless competitors, men who would bankrupt entire families for profit. But even they cloaked their actions in strategy, not morality. Vivian, on the other hand, had convinced herself that her cruelty was virtue. He met her gaze and said quietly, "If that's what you believe, then you don't just misunderstand children, Vivian. You misunderstand humanity." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, but then it returned, polished, defiant, unrepentant. And Jonathan knew. He wasn't arguing with a mistake or a moment of anger. He was facing a conviction, one that had already left scars on an innocent child. In the kitchen, Carmen dabbed gently at her daughter's scraped knee, but her hands trembled. Jonathan stood nearby, silent, waiting. Finally, Carmen spoke, her voice hushed as if the walls themselves might carry her words back to Vivian. "Mr. Jonathan," she said carefully, "there are things I've never told you. Mrs. Vivian, she makes threats. She's warned me more than once that if I ever cross her, I'd lose my job. She said she'd tell people I was stealing jewelry, hide things in my bag to prove it. Without references, I wouldn't find work anywhere. I can't afford that risk. Not with Lana." Jonathan's chest tightened. He turned to the girl, who stared down at her small hands folded in her lap. After a moment, she spoke, her voice fragile but clear. "Mrs. Vivian says people like us should remember our place, that we should be grateful just to be here. She says I'll never have the same chances as other children, because we're poor." She hesitated, touching her dark skin with one trembling finger. "And because of this, she says I should never forget I'm different, that I shouldn't dream too big." The words hung heavy in the air. Jonathan felt the weight of years pressing down on both mother and daughter, the quiet suffering they had endured in silence. He crouched beside them, his tone steady but firm. "You don't have to live in fear anymore," he told them. "Not in my house. I promise you both of you are safe now." For the first time, Carmen's eyes lifted to meet his, glistening with tears. Lana clung to her mother's arm, still trembling but holding on. Jonathan's resolve hardened. Whatever illusions he'd held about his wife had shattered. Now he saw the truth. Vivian's cruelty wasn't just personal. It was systematic, deliberate, and it had gone on far too long. Jonathan closed the kitchen door softly behind him, leaving Carmen and Lana together. His chest felt heavy, every breath thick with anger and disbelief. For 3 years he had lived beside a stranger, blind to the quiet torment happening under his own roof. That blindness ended now. He strode down the long hallway, past the glittering chandeliers and polished wood that suddenly felt cold, hollow, unearned. His office door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time all day, he allowed himself to let the fury surface. Not in shouts, not in broken objects, but in a sharp clarity that cut through every thought. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing. Every word, every detail Carmen and Lana had revealed spilled onto the screen. The threats of job loss, the planted theft scheme, the cruel lessons about race and poverty, the bruises hidden beneath silence. He wrote with the precision of a man who had built empires out of contracts and numbers. Documentation, evidence. No more blind trust, no more assumptions. If Vivian had built her power on fear, he would dismantle it with truth. When his notes were saved, he reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one name he needed, Diana Rodriguez. Civil rights lawyer. Brilliant, relentless, someone he had met at a networking gala months earlier. She had spoken with passion about defending the powerless. Jonathan had admired her then. Now he needed her. The phone rang once, twice. Then a steady voice answered. "Jonathan." "What a surprise." "Diana," he said, his tone clipped. "I need your help. Urgently." Something in his voice must have carried the gravity because she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me." Jonathan explained everything, from the shattered vase to Lana's whispered confessions. He spared no detail, his words rushing but precise. On the other end, silence stretched, punctuated only by Diana's occasional sharp intake of breath. When he finished, she spoke carefully, her voice steady but firm. "Legally, you're in a strong position. But Jonathan, listen to me. She won't fold easily. People like your wife, they escalate when they feel cornered. Expect manipulation, maybe even retaliation. From this moment on, you must record everything. Every word. Every action. Don't confront her outright until we have evidence." Jonathan nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Already started. I've documented what Carmen and Lana told me." "Good." "But that's just the start," Diana replied. "I'll be there in less than an hour. In the meantime, keep her talking. Let her reveal herself. You need to give her enough rope." Jonathan exhaled, feeling a grim resolve harden inside him. "Understood." After ending the call, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His mind shifted into the same mode he used to dismantle hostile takeovers. Calm, calculated, strategic. Only this time, the stakes weren't corporate profits. They were human lives. He opened another file on his laptop and drafted a plan. Step 1. Keep Carmen and Lana safe. Reassure them they would not lose their livelihood. Step 2. Collect undeniable proof of Vivian's cruelty and manipulation. Step 3. Expose her, not just privately, but in a way she could never spin or bury. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. 2 of his most trusted private investigators arrived, called in discreetly through his company's network. He explained the situation in clipped sentences, his tone sharp as steel. They set up recording equipment in the main living areas, small devices hidden in plain sight. By the time Jonathan closed his laptop, his home had quietly transformed into a stage. Every word Vivian spoke, every mask she wore, would now be captured. For the first time since stepping through his front door that afternoon, Jonathan felt the balance of power shift. Vivian believed she was the puppeteer, pulling strings of fear and intimidation. She had no idea the curtain was about to fall. Vivian paced the living room, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome of arrogance. Jonathan lingered just beyond the doorway, silent, the small recording device in his pocket already live. "Yes, Mother," Vivian hissed, her tone thick with irritation. "I know you think I'm too strict with the staff, but someone has to keep these people in their place. Jonathan, he's too soft. He doesn't understand the lines between us and them." She laughed, low and sharp. "If I left everything to him, the servants would think they own the house." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Vivian's voice grew bolder, dripping with confidence as she continued. "Don't worry, I have a plan. If Jonathan makes this into some noble crusade, we'll activate Plan B. 3 years of carefully documenting his little outbursts, his long absences, his late nights at the office. All I need is to spin it as neglect and instability, and the courts will eat it up. With alimony, I'll live comfortably without ever lifting a finger." Her laugh rang out again, echoing cruelly in the empty hall. "Rich men are predictable, Mother. You provoke them, then you play the victim. They always fold. And Jonathan, he's no different." Jonathan's hand tightened around the tablet he held, the live stream already running. Dozens of his professional contacts were tuned in, hearing every poisonous word spill from her mouth. Vivian wasn't finished. "And if the maid gets difficult, well, I've told her before. I can plant a bracelet or a necklace in her bag. Who do you think they'll believe? A cleaning woman or me?" She smirked into the phone, her back still turned. Fear keeps them quiet. It always does. The viewer count on Jonathan's tablet ticked upward, hundreds becoming thousands. Comments of shock and outrage began to flood the screen. Vivian ended with a final flourish, her voice almost gleeful. "If Jonathan insists on defending those people, he'll learn. There are consequences for siding with servants over his own wife." At that moment, Jonathan stepped into the doorway, holding up the streaming tablet. His calm voice cut through the room. "Vivian, dear," he said evenly, "you have an audience." Her head whipped around, her face draining of color as her eyes landed on the glowing screen. The sound of her own voice echoed back at her, broadcast live to thousands. For the first time that day, it wasn't Lana or Carmen shrinking under Vivian's gaze. It was Vivian herself, caught in the trap she had built for others. The viewer count surged past 3,000, climbing higher by the second. Jonathan's LinkedIn contacts, fellow CEOs, charity directors, and board members filled the live chat with stunned disbelief. Outrage scrolled across the screen, executives withdrawing partnerships, foundations vowing to review her role. Vivian froze mid-sentence, her phone slipping from her hand and clattering against the marble floor. The same mouth that had spat. Venom moments earlier now gaped soundlessly as her own words echoed back from the tablet in Jonathan's grip. 3,000 people, Jonathan said evenly, stepping forward. business leaders, philanthropists, your entire social circle. They've all just heard your philosophy on keeping people in their place. They've all heard how you use race, fear, and lies to control a child. The blood drained from Vivian's face. She stumbled back, lowering herself into a chair as though her legs would no longer hold her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. You twisted this." Jonathan cut her off with a cold, final truth. "No, Vivian, you did this. With your own words." He turned the tablet so she could see the flood of comments, the condemnation, the disgust. "The mask is gone. The world sees you now." Vivian's hand flew to her mouth, but there was no performance left to hide behind. Her empire of fear collapsed in an instant, buried beneath the weight of her own arrogance. For the first time in 3 years, Jonathan felt clarity. She wasn't untouchable. She was finished. Within minutes, the ripple effect hit. Notifications poured in. Charities stripping Vivian's name from their boards, the country club rescinding her membership, business networks publicly severing ties. Her reputation, once carefully built on elegance and influence, disintegrated in real time. Diana Rodriguez, calm and precise, handed Vivian a formal packet of legal notices. Charges of psychological abuse, intimidation, and attempted fraud. Vivian stared at the papers with hollow eyes, her social empire crumbling as swiftly as it had risen. From the kitchen, Carmen stepped forward, her posture no longer hunched in fear. Lana held her hand, but this time her small shoulders were squared. She looked directly at Vivian, her voice steady. "Mr. Jonathan told me bullies only win when no one is watching. Now everyone is watching. You can't hurt us anymore." The words pierced the silence like a bell. Jonathan felt pride swell in his chest, not only for Lana's courage but for Carmen's quiet strength. He placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "You're safe now, and I promise you'll never face this alone again." As Vivian sat in stunned ruin, Jonathan reflected on his blindness. The years he had ignored the quiet warnings. That mistake would never be repeated. By evening, headlines were already spreading. Wealthy socialite exposed for abuse and racism. Vivian's downfall had begun. Not in whispers, but in daylight. Her cruelty turned into a case study of how power unravels when truth is revealed.